Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. It is Wednesday at about 10:14, so I hope everyone's doing good. And again, I want to thank. There's been a cool little rash of people chiming in and commenting on the videos. It's super cool. I just got to reached 400 subscribers this week, so very very cool. I run, well, I don't know if I even want to phrase it that way, but I guess I run a pretty small potatoes uh, organization, if you want to call it that. But you know, Film Fanatic is just a passion of mine. I want to always keep growing it as much as I can, keep learning the different skill sets, better ways to articulate and to kind of get across ideas and points, trying to always increase and expand as far as variety, but yet there always being, for the most part, there's kind of always a focus on a certain style of films or style, which I think I kind of have as far as the world of exploitation. But it's a cliche thing to say, but I think it's kind of cliche, or it is cliche because it kind of rings truth. Variety is the spice of life. And I feel the more that you kind of, check out, the main thing is, I think, for those kinds of openings, it's just, having an open mind. But I think, the more things you check out, the more variety. I think it's just really refreshing. So, and, it gives, I have lots of different tastes, different interests. So it kind of shows that, to the public. It's something I talk about anyway. So today's show is going to be another kind of spin-off show or side show or specialty show. And I've been doing pretty good amount of music shows. So that's been a lot of fun. I've always talked about, kind of my favorite styles of music, and that's electronic music is my favorite style to listen to and to perform. I have a long, deep history. I've covered lots of bands and groups in that style that really are tremendously inspirational for me, just as a listener, but then also for my band Quantum. I and jazz music is also my favorite style. I find myself listening to either of those styles at any given moment, any given day, and sometimes when you want to watch a particular movie, maybe you're in a mood, say for, a suspense film or something really gory or a comedy, if you will. And the same thing with music. Certain styles of music, certain kinds of things. You're in a mood. You kind of get in this headspace where are looking to, you're craving something in particular. But the thing for me that's kind of unique, I guess, as far as my taste in music and film also. With film, for instance, I can throw in any kind of exploitation horror movie at any given time, any given day. I find myself not having to be in a particular mood to watch a movie like that in that style. I feel like it's just kind of my go-to thing, and it's just always fun and inspiring and ridiculous. But I can just throw in any of those movies at any given time. Usually when I watch a film, it's usually at night. Other styles of films, I tend to, want to I'll be in a certain kind of mood. The thing that I love about exploitation movies is that it covers, it's a big kind of genre and kind of a big ridiculous genre, but it covers within that there's so many different styles. If I'm in a mood, say for something really gory, a slasher film, some weird sex exploitation movie, or a giallo film, an action movie. So there's so many different kinds of things, and even surrealistic films, even comedy films. So within that, I feel like it satisfies everything, all at once. And with music, especially with electronic and jazz-based music, it's the same thing. There's so many different elements that make up those genre-specific things that it just kind of just satisfies me automatically. So today's show is going to be on probably my favorite. Well, it's always hard to pick your favorite or your favorites, but I will have to say it's my favorite album of all time. And it's a funny thing. The other day, I was out talking to somebody about music, and somebody I have like gotten to know pretty well. He's a very cool guy, and we've talked in passing about a lot of music. And one day, or just on Sunday, I just asked him, you know, he's always playing music. His name is Kirk, and he is one of the owners of Hey Sailor, which is a newer music venue that just opened up in October of last year, which is just the best place around. And he's like technically the sound guy, but he's in charge of playing the music inside the restaurant itself. And I love a lot of the music that he plays, and he's got a pretty cool wide variety. So we were talking about music, and I was like asking him, so what do you have a to go to style that you listen to? You can listen to anytime, or what is your jam? What do you like to listen to regularly? And we talked about a lot of rock music and things like that, and then I talked about my love of electronic and jazz. And it's a funny thing now when it happens, when you have that conversation with somebody about that, where you might just come out and ask them, what did you listen to today? What kind of music do that really, what's the style of music that totally jives with you? Or do you have a go-to style? Or what's your favorite movie that you've seen in the last few years? What was the last time you went to the theater? And it's funny, and maybe it's not any different, but what I find when it happens, a lot of the times people don't know how to answer that question. And people typically will say, well, I like everything. Or they will kind of have this moment of being confused on what to say. It's kind of a weird thing. And I don't know if that's because of, people's attentions now, the way we access media, which is very much, set up in this strange attention deficit format. But to be honest, it kind of always, and I know it's just a kind of a cordial kind of conversational way of answering the question, where it's just general and broad. But honestly, it kind of always annoys me a little bit when somebody says, "Well, I listen to everything," or I like everything," and when I'm actually trying to learn a little bit about that person, what they dig, because I feel like you learn about a person automatically when you just talk about their tastes and interests, and they can kind of name, that book or that movie or that album or that place that they've gone to. You can instantly learn a lot about a person. One of the coolest things well, for me at least, that I do all the time, if I know someone who, maybe they're an acquaintance or they're a friend, and say they invite me over to their house, and say it's the first time I've gone to their place, I'll go over, and the first thing that I will do when I go in there is I will check out where they, or if they have a space, but usually most people do. I'll check out their general book selection, their movie movie selection and their music selection. Whether they have CDs or tapes or cassettes, or there's none, or if they have, a stack of books, a little bookshelf, a little mini library, or if they have a setup for watching movies at home. Maybe they'll have their DVDs or their Blu-rays or their VHSs kind of displayed out. And for me, I love that. To me, it's like breaking bread. Like automatically, I get a sense of what this person is into. And to me, that's what it's all about. And I feel like you can go into someone's house and like check out these very things and learn about a person so much. And I don't know, it's kind of a funny thing, but I've always been that way. And and I always find, which is funny, I always find like if they have some things that really that maybe I know about or that I'm interested in myself, then automatically we hit it off, you know. And it also can act where it will I don't know, pique my curiosity about wanting to know that person even more. Just kind of a funny thing. So today's show is going to be on my favorite jazz album of all time. And it's, again, it's a very hard thing to sometimes nail. To sometimes, sit down and like, we all have maybe a list in our heads of favorite movies, favorite books, favorite what have you. Whether that's like totally formal and you're like, okay, 1 through 5, go, or 1 through 10, go, 1 through 20, go. Or it's like, oh, okay, I can think of these artists or, you know, and I have them in this like loose order, but they're kind of these, they're definitely these people I always revisit or they're always like kind of in my head. And again, sometimes it's very hard to do that. Um, but today's show is on, again, it was a little bit tricky because there's another album that is tied with this album, maybe a little bit less, or maybe a slightly behind this album. And my favorite, but overall, my favorite jazz album of all time is Speak No Evil by the incredible Wayne Shorter. It came out in 1966. It was released on the classic Blue Note record. It's it is an album that I have such a long history with. I have like listened to this album in so many incarnations, more than probably any other album really in history, and not just jazz, but just music in general. Freddie Hubbard, the famous and just iconic master trumpet player. Ron Carter plays bass on this album. Herbie Hancock, the amazing Herbie Hancock, and the god of drums, or one of the many gods, Elvin Jones. I've always been, obviously I'm a drummer, and I've always been, Elvin Jones is like a titan, and he's like essential for anybody. Well, I think he should be essential for anyone into music, just as a force of music. But especially for drums, he's always been one of my favorite drummers. And I have most of the albums that he's been involved in over the years. Especially, he was most well known for playing with John Coltrane for many years. But I have to say, and those albums are just incredible. But I have to say, I think his performance on Speak No Evil is the greatest. Just, just so incredible. And I have such a weird history with this album in some ways. I had this album on CD for years and years and years, and I've listened to this album so many times that I can't even begin to count how many times I've listened to this album. I've literally there's been times where I'll put Speaking of Evil in from Wayne Shorter, and I'll just literally listen to it. Like say I put it if I'm driving somewhere, or say I'm home or wherever. I'll have the CD and I put it in. There's been many times where I'll just put it in my car or at home, and I'll just listen to it over and over again. And it will literally stay in my player for like days, sometimes weeks, and I'll just listen to it. And I always get something new. There's never this, sometimes it happens with particular albums or movies for that matter. You know, you kind of get maybe a little bit burnt out, of it, and you're just like you kind of reach a point, you take it out after a long period of listening to it, and then you never kind of go back to it. You're just kind of like, and you almost forget about it. It's kind of a weird thing. With this album, Speaking of Evil, that's never happened, and I have listened to it again so many times. And I had this album on CD for years, multiple copies of it on CD. Or I shouldn't say multiple copies, but I had one copy of it on CD. And I had this freak accident where my car set itself on fire. And that was one of the albums that got burnt. And I was super pissed and bummed. And recently, for Christmas, I got this really awesome gift from Santa Claus, and I got this stereo, and it's a stereo that has Bluetooth capability, CD capability, and then also cassette capability, and it's fantastic. I've been going through all of my tapes. When I was in high school and whatnot, I used to buy tapes. I have probably 1,000 tapes, so I've been going through them and listening to them, and it's been really awesome. And I found my favorite Wayne Shorter albums, and especially Speaking of Evil. So I've been listening to it a lot, but the other day, the stereo ate the fucking tape. So it got destroyed. So now I have to buy it on CD. And it reiterated the point to me, for me, why cassettes are just shit, because they get eaten. VHS, they don't last. They get eaten so quickly and easily. They get destroyed so easily. And I don't understand. Like, there's this trend now in this like weird boutique, fancy hipster way, that, or in the, where people are buying cassettes again and buying VHS, and the value for that format has actually gone up. It's kind of crazy, because the actual quality, yeah, I mean, you can get good quality. Sometimes cassettes sound really good, but they're so shitty, and they get eaten and chewed up, and they fuck up your player. And so anyway, I gotta buy Speaking of Evil again on CD. But I heard this album for the first time when I was in college. I was probably 19, and I instantly, like, I've talked about that before, where I got into jazz pretty late, and it took me a while to get into it. I It was so weird, because when I first heard jazz music, Miles Davis, John Coltrane, the classics, when I heard all of those albums, it was funny, because I knew I had an appreciation for it, but I didn't understand the language. I didn't have the bug of where I was like, where it was resonating with me. But it was funny, because I knew it was like two levels, two different fronts. On one hand, I knew jazz at that time. I knew jazz was an incredible art form, and in order for me to kind of hopefully get better as a musician, I knew it was important for me to kind of understand it, and to eventually learn technically what it was about, and I needed to eventually appreciate the music. But and I did. I would get copies of albums from friends and teachers that I had, and I would throw in this stuff, and I just couldn't get into it for so long, because it felt like, I don't know, the music was dated to me for some strange reason. The drums sounded too old, or the recordings, everything sounded dated. It was really weird. But even though at the same time I felt this music is really important and incredible, hopefully I can get into this someday. And after a few years, I started listening to the same records, and I found myself completely, all of a sudden, I was like completely enamored and just completely blown away by how magical this music was. And it just clicked with me. And ever since then, I just dove totally into it. And to this day. But the thing that was unique, when I kind of got into the music, I started to buy as many jazz albums as I could. I started to get, ask people about it. And I generally, not only from an educational standpoint, was something I wanted to get into, but I generally became a fan of the music. And right around that time was when I first heard Speak No Evil from Wayne Shorter. And the first time I heard that album, it just blew me away. And it blew away all of my kind of weird um, perceptions of what jazz was. I always, before I got into jazz and I developed a taste for, as a listener, to really, where it was, you know, um, where it just really resonated with me. I had this weird thing about jazz. I always thought, okay, that music is for like old people, old fogies. It's music that is only played for like, fancy cocktail scenarios, art openings. It's all background music, and it has kind of this very, very much just a nostalgic kind of a thing. It wasn't, to me, it didn't have, anything really beyond that. And I felt like it was this uh, dated kind of thing, even though at the same time I felt it was really important. And and then when I got into certain groups, especially Miles Davis, the Miles Davis Quintet, which is my favorite group of all time, and tons of others, and especially this album, it blew away my notion of what jazz really was. I typically like a lot of dark art, things that are kind of in the darker space of things. And when I first heard Speak No Evil, it totally smashed my notion of jazz. Like, it's a very spooky album. And even a better example is, or not a better example, but the same kind of thing. I typically like music that has rawness to it. I love pop music and feel good music too, and but with jazz, I kind of felt, oh, it's just it's cocktail hour music. It's not really, it doesn't have an edge and all these kinds of things. And when I remember when I first heard Miles Davis Plug Nickel, which is a live album with Herbie Hancock, Ron Carter, Wayne Shorter, Tony Williams, it blew my fucking mind because they were playing a lot of the standards, like tunes like Kind of Blue and tunes that were well known and tunes that were on Miles Davis albums, previous albums. And when I first heard Live at the Plug Nickel, it was some of the most ferocious, intense music I've ever heard in my life. And it had this really dark side to it. The music had this edge. It was really raw. Um, it had such an intensity to it, and the music had this kind of darkness to it. And I was like, wow, like this is not what I thought jazz was. And it was like, just this kind of animalistic connection. And when I first heard Speak No Evil, it was kind of the same thing. Like suddenly this music was, just connected to me, con- connected with me in in this completely different way. And Speak No Evil is a very kind of dark, spooky album. I remember getting the album and reading the liner notes, and there's one tune in particular on Speak No Evil, which is my favorite jazz tune of all time, and that is a tune called Dance Cadaverous. And I remember being so fascinated with that song because it was so spooky. And the whole album has this very spooky, kind of dark, atmospheric vibe. And reading the liner notes where Wayne Shorter was talking about kind of the inspiration, or what, what kind of made that tune what it was, and why it was called Dance Cadaverous. He was talking about how when he kind of conceived of that tune or wrote that tune, what he was his mindset, he was like imagining himself being kind of in the basement of this morgue and being surrounded in this dark room with dead bodies. And that was kind of what he was feeling, and kind of what was the inspiration for this song and this tune. And I was just like, whoa. Like, and being that I love horror movies, obviously, I was like, instant connection to that. And I was like, wow, jazz is not at all what I thought it was. At all. And it just, it acted as, when I had that realization, it acted as a springboard to where I was just like, I'm all in. I'm gonna explore this amazing music as much as I can. And this was, speaking of evil, Wayne Shorter was one of those albums. It probably was the album, the studio album that did that for me. And I just like was from that point on just completely obsessed with this album, and I just listened to it nonstop, even to this day. So, and I think from top to bottom, not only you know the lineup with Freddie Hubbard, Ron Carter, you know Herbie, Elvin Jones, and Wayne. Like, again, they all collectively have amazing albums that they've put out solo in the solo realm that are just iconic. But I almost feel too, like how I was describing, at the end of the day, I think it's the greatest performance of Elvin Jones. I almost feel the same way for the rest of the band. I think it's probably the best they ever sounded. And it was such a unique lineup, um, and a true, like, kind of evolution of jazz, where you had these titans of jazz that were already established. And this album, I just feel like they just pushed the whole art form even further, and it's such a unique album. And I became fascinated with how it was recorded too. It's so, I think it's the, probably also, for me, the greatest sounding album. It's got so much organic pop to it. It feels so live. It feels so real. It feels really primal. And it's one of those albums too. Like, I've heard it in a lot of different environments. Like, I've heard it on big speakers. I remember when we used to play at this really great restaurant that might be opening again, Fog. They would play this album sometimes when we were there, and they had this really big, stereo system house speakers, and they would play this album on, there, and it would just sound so amazing. And the acoustics in that room were not very good. And I've listened to it on little speakers. I've listened to this album on a computer with notes without headphones, with no speakers. I have it on CD. I've listened to it in my car. I have a couple of good stereos. I've listened to it in every conceivable way that you can probably listen to an album. And there's something about how that album was recorded that it sounds so damn good. Sometimes with jazz albums, the bass can kind of get lost. And with this album, the way it was recorded, Ron Carter's sound and his tone is so rich, and it's one of those albums that I've heard on multiple in multiple different ways, and it always sounds full and just completely rich and just gorgeous, amazing, And I think jazz is truly an American art form, and I feel like it's something, for Americans, something to be proud of. Sometimes it's very hard to be proud to be an American these days, but if anything, the jazz style, the jazz art form is it's something to be cherished, and it's a true art form, and it's uniquely an American style, and that's something to be proud of. As far as our lineage to culture, and just being an American. So, it's greatest jazz album of all time, as far as I'm concerned. So, thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.